prophet. I asked last week how many people, and we got new ones here, so how many people have seen the series? It was only 2 episodes on TV called Prophets and Kings. If you have Hulu, I would highly suggest that you go back and watch it. The first time I watched it, I thought it was a little long and kind of boring until I had already seen it. The second time I watched it, I loved it. And so it's kind of like this new Star Wars movie. It's the same way. I didn't like it the first time, loved it the second time. But we looked at the build-up to the kings. We had Eli, who was the high priest, and Samuel, we won't get into all that this week, but he came back to the temple, back to tabernacle, because his mom had dedicated him back to the Lord. He became the new high priest after studying under Eli. And as Samuel is one of the judges and ruling over Israel, Israel looks at all the other nations and they see what they don't have, and that's a king. And they're no longer happy with God. Even though God's been winning all the wars for them, that's not good enough. They want an earthly king, just like everybody else. And so Saul becomes the new king, appointed by God. So on the movie, I used some of the pictures from here and some of the pictures from the Bible series. But Saul, the man, the myth, the legend, the disobedient. First crack out of the bag. The first king they get isn't all what they'd hoped they would have. So we did the recap. The big thing, though, was they wouldn't trust in God. They wanted a king. Now, Saul. I want to look at Saul today because a lot of us don't know much about Saul. How many knew that he was a farmer? He was not a mighty warrior. He was actually a farmer out plowing his fields. Now, his dad, Kish, was a very rich landowner. And he also had a lot of livestock, and he had a group of donkeys that came up missing. And so he sends Saul and a bunch of his comrades off to go find these donkeys. And they search, and they search, and they search, and they can't find them anywhere. And somebody says, hey, I think you need to go see the prophet, the seer, the one who knows all things. Maybe he can tell you where the donkeys are at. Now, you gotta love this, don't you? Because even though circumstances were happening out of their control, God had orchestrated everything right down to this meeting. God had placed Saul right in front of Samuel, and neither one knew it, and it was because of a herd of donkeys. So, as Saul comes into the group, he speaks to Samuel, and as he's approaching Samuel, God says something to him that'll change everything. He says, here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He shall rule my people. Samuel didn't know this up to this point until he actually saw Saul coming. So Samuel told Saul, and you got to love this too, everything was done in secret. He tells Saul, I want you to spend the night. He doesn't anoint him right away. And they talk and they eat, and they spend the night. And in the morning, Samuel says, send your servants on forward, but I want you to stay here for just a minute. So the servants take off, and it's just Saul and just Samuel. And it's at this time that he pours the oil that was in the ram's horn on his head and anoints him the very first king over Israel. Can you imagine what that must have felt like for Saul? I mean, first of all, this had never been done before. I mean, this was totally out of the blue. A farmer. And here he's being told, I mean, that would be like too much information for me to process, I think. And then on top of it, he says, go and tell no one. Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my mind around all this, and now you tell me I can't tell anyone? We've done it in secret, so is it true? Is it real? Did it stick? And then Samuel says, don't worry, your donkeys have already been found. Go back home. So Saul goes back home. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Saul actually was very humble. At the very beginning, he was very humble. And he was very shy. He didn't like crowds. He didn't like people. He liked farming because it was just he and his oxen out in a field by himself. He didn't have to really interact with people too much. So he's thinking, a king? Really? That's going to like throw me so far out of my comfort zone, I'm not even going to know how to act. note that Saul didn't sign up for this. He didn't interview for the job. God just appointed him. So my question to you is, has God ever chosen you for something that you didn't feel qualified for, or you were totally scared to do it? God does not choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. So on top of it, even if you got excited, you couldn't tell anyone, not even your family or your closest friends. And what if you actually did tell them? Do you think they would believe you? Yeah. You said you did what on that trip? So Samuel summons, and this is the reason why he told him don't tell anyone yet. Because he summons all of the tribal leaders. Now you have to realize that each tribe had their own leader, and they were scattered all over. So it was going to take a little time to get everybody to come to Mizpah. And when the time came to anoint Saul, guess what? Saul was nowhere to be found. It was the Lord who told them where to look, and he said Saul was hiding in the baggage. So let's talk about baggage for a moment. We all have it, right? We all carry it. I love that verse because Saul wasn't just hiding, but he was hiding in what? In baggage. Don't we all hide in that? If there's something that we don't want to do or something that we're scared of or something that takes us out of our comfort zone, where do we run to? The thing that's familiar, and it's that baggage that we carry. The good, the bad, the ugly, the piled high. Well, that is where Saul is hiding. We all have baggage, it's just how you carry it that matters. I like that one, I had to throw that one in. But there's an important detail to bring out even with that. Because it wasn't the people that find Saul. God told Samuel where to look. See, it was God who said to look, he's hiding in the baggage. Which means that no matter where you hide, God will always see you. You can never run from him. Which is kind of a scary thought in itself. Because he knows everything. He sees everything. So Saul was very shy and humble, but he was not meek. And there is a difference. Because the Lord was with him, and he felt God. He was not meek, and he was willing to do what needed to be done as far as going to battle. So after the ceremony, after he's been crowned king of everything, in front of everybody, after the ceremony, nothing happened. In fact, what did he do? He went back to farming. So he's crowned king, there's no palace, there's no fancy throne to go to. He just goes back to doing what he does best. He gets out the plow, and he starts working his oxen. But this is the turning point. Because there are messengers from Jabesh, which is another tribe, and they're racing through the villages, pleading for help. Because the Ammonites, not only had they captured Jabesh and Gilead, the Israelites said they would surrender. They were flying a white flag. But they said, that's not good enough. We want to make a statement to all of Israel. So the king ordered that every man have his right eye be gouged out. See, this is where God steps in. Because he allowed that pride and arrogance of the king to make him so confident that he says, you know what? I'm even going to give you 7 days to go find help. You got 7 days. If you can't bring back any help, that's when we're going to do it. So here you have the messengers running to village by village, telling them of the plight, and everybody's mourning it that it's going to happen, but not one person stepped up to the task. That is, until Saul was out plowing his field. And the messengers came and told him what was going to happen. And he was so moved and so frustrated when they told him that nobody else would come to their aid that he slaughtered his oxen right there. He cut them into 12 pieces and he sent them to all 12 tribes of Israel and says, if you don't stand up with me and help fight these guys, this is what I'm going to do to you. Well, needless to say, everybody jumped in line and decided to follow Saul. So the Ammonites, not really expecting anything, they're, just kind of lounging around, killing time, waiting for their 7 days. Well, during this time, Saul orchestrates a whole group of people. And he was smart for being a farmer. This had to have been wisdom from God, because he split them into 3 different divisions, and he used almost like a guerrilla warfare tactic that we have now. That had never been done before. And so he came in and they walked all night long, and in the morning they stationed themselves around the camp of the Ammonites instead of just coming full force like they were used to. And his strategy worked. And God totally confused the army. So much so that they started kind of killing each other, and Saul's guys were able to run in, and they totally defeated the Ammonites. So now his kingship was officially established. Well, this is Saul and his son Jonathan. And actually Jonathan, it was his oldest, he's the one that at the very beginning started leading the charge into most of those battles and helped them become victorious. I put this in here, and I want to thank Rusty. I said this last week, but you weren't here. A couple of those books that you gave me last year on the garage sale that we had here is where I got to pull a lot of the information of what was going on in that time frame and pictures. So this is what Saul's place would have looked like. It was not a palace, it was actually a fortress. And when we think of Israelites, we think that Jerusalem was always the capital. Not so. Actually, it was at Gilead that Saul set up his fortress, his castle. But the neat thing was, he made it double wall right here. So there was 2 walls. He was smart. And that gave him storage space. Any women here, you'd love a husband that'd say, you know what, I'm going to make 2 walls so you have lots of storage space. But he put his arsenal in there. They put food. But it also gave his men places to hide so they could shoot the artillery out, but then they could hide in between. And this is how smart he was. He filled a lot, especially where the doors and windows were at the bottom, he filled all that double wall with rubble, so that way when they came with battering rams, they couldn't break the walls. I thought that was cool. And this is actually a live photo of what is left of Saul's castle, which isn't a whole lot. But in Isaiah predicts this. Chapter 10:29, he says, Gibeah, Saul has fled, and all the remains are the stones from one tower, which was right here, and the pieces of the wall, which were here and here. So Saul wanted nothing more than really to have peace. And he wanted to go about his business, but there was a problem, because Israel had their biggest enemy ever, and they were the Philistines. Now, how many people have heard of the Philistines? We're going to be looking at the Philistines a lot, and next week it's going to bring us to the big battle with them. But this was the first battle. After victory with the Ammonites, though, Saul's excited, and the people are on board behind him, and they think, you know what, maybe we can conquer our next enemy. So he gets over 3,000 troops, and again, he puts them in their 3 strategic locations, and he sends Jonathan off with 1,000 troops. They struck the first blow. They surprised the Philistines, and so the Israelites were able to come in and be victorious. Now you have to realize this was a small group of Philistines that they attacked. Well, when news got back to the Philistine headquarters, what do you think happened? Yeah, well, it was a small victory, now a big problem. Have you ever whacked a hornet's nest? Yeah, well, big difference. The Philistines had iron. They're very strong, very sturdy for their weapons and armor. But the Israelites only had copper and brass. And think about it, their shields were wood with leather over it. Their actual attire was just their normal clothes. They didn't stand a chance against the Philistine army. And all of you know about David. What weapon did he use? A slingshot. Did you know that was not just David? For thousands of years before that, that was the weapon of choice by all of the Israelites. So picture this in your mind, if you will. You have an entire Philistine army in iron, in full suits, and you have a bunch of Israelites with wood leather and slingshots. On their own, there is no way that they could ever defeat them. But with God, they're about to do something. So Samuel told Saul that the Lord said to take the troops 13 months. This is what we read about today in the scripture. It might not have made sense then. But now we're at the biggest battle that they've ever confronted. And Samuel says, God says, I want you to go 13 miles away, and I want you to wait 7 days, and I will come, and we will offer a sacrifice for the troops before battle. 7 days. All right. So Saul does it. He's really trying. He really, really wants to do what God says. So he goes off. For 7 days, they wait. It's the only instruction that Samuel gave him, and it was the only commandment from God to be followed out. So Saul obeyed, but the men became restless. Every day they saw the Philistine army coming, and they saw the sun shining off of their bronze hats. And they said that there were so many, it was like the grains of sand on the seashore. I mean, it was just troop after troop after troop. And they're standing there, and the Israelites are leaving troop after troop after troop. And as we read, they were hiding, they were leaving, they were getting as far away as they could because they saw the inevitable. There's no way we can stand up to these people. And as the days kept going, it got to the 6th day. Saul's holding out. It got to the 7th day. Samuel doesn't show up. The rest of the guys are going, I'm out of here. They leave him. What is he supposed to do? Well, that's why I like Saul, because unfortunately, I hate to say, I probably can relate more to Saul, because Saul decides to take matters in his own hands. He goes, okay, I waited 7 days, everybody's leaving me, I got to do something. So he decides to offer the sacrifice himself and not wait for Samuel. And I love the scriptures. It says, immediately, I mean, he had no more, he was still not doing the sacrifice, and Samuel shows up, furious. He says, you only had one job to do, only one command, and you didn't do it. See, it was a test. God was testing him right away to see what kind of man he was going to be, if he was actually going to rely on God. Because God knew that even with 3,000 troops against hundreds of thousands of troops, he didn't stand a chance. It was God that was going to have to fight the battle. And that's when Samuel tells him that his kingdom would have continued throughout forever, but because of this, it will not. And that God has sought someone after his own heart. Now, it may seem a little harsh. I mean, when you read this, you go, really? Seriously? He did one thing because the guys were not, they were leaving him, and I would have done the same thing. But God knew his heart from the beginning, and Saul's going to do several things throughout his time that just continue to show why God has got another man to take the place. So Saul's army is now down to 600. 600. Impossible, right? Do you remember another man by the name of Gideon, who God dwindled his entire army from 10,000 down to 300? And when he had 300 unarmed men, he said, okay, now I want you to go battle. Because God won the battle for them. So, 300 men, Saul decides, okay, we're going to go to battle. Jonathan runs in with just one other man, and he starts the confusion. And Saul capitalizes on that, and he sends his troops in. When they start coming in, and they see that they're actually winning, all the Israelites that had run away in hidden caves, they join the group. And then, on the Philistine side, there was Israelites who were mercenaries, they were cousins. They're actually fighting for the Philistines. But when they see that the Israelites are starting to win, they turn on the Philistines. And so they have more people. And so the surge actually makes them victorious because they're being attacked from all sides. So now Saul is definitely king. He is the king they have been waiting for, the king that would come riding in on the white horse to save them from their enemies. And the big part of this is now they have iron. Before they had no iron, they pillaged the Philistines. They took their iron swords, they took their iron spears, they took their armor, they took the forges to actually make iron weapons. God with Saul at battle. And then you wonder, so would Saul get a second chance? You know, to me that seems kind of harsh, because I probably would have done maybe the same thing in the same situation. I don't know. Saul's gotten older. Battles have aged him. God gives him another test. And this one's kind of a hard one, especially when you read it. This doesn't sound like a loving God, because God commands him. There's the Amalekites. And he commands them to go in and wipe everybody and everything out. Destroy all the people, destroy all the livestock, destroy all of their stuff. You have to realize that the Amalekites were the ones that slaughtered the Israelites when they were coming out of Egypt to the Promised Land. They were very, very evil people. And when God tells him to kill everyone, there was a reason, because they were going to constantly be a thorn in their side. Generations forever. So Saul's a little reluctant, but he goes, and he does exactly what God has commanded. Except, there was one problem. Yeah, he said he did everything that God commanded, but he disobeyed. He did not kill the Amalekites' king, Agag. He saved him, and he saved the very best. He saved the very best of the livestock, and they saved some of the weapons. And Samuel shows up again, and he confronts Saul. And he says, "What have you done?" The Lord told Samuel, "Saul has gone to Carmel," and you have to realize this too. There he set up a monument of his own honor, and he turned and went down to Gilgal. So here we have a man who started out so humble and listening to God. And now that he's still not done what God said, he goes up and he makes his own monument to himself. So Samuel finds Saul and he says, Saul says to him, "May the Lord bless you, for I've carried out the Lord's instructions." I love this line because Samuel says, "Ask then, what is the sound of bleating sheep in my ears? And what is the lowing of cattle that I hear?" And Saul's response to his lie is, "Well, the soldiers brought back the very best, so that way we could sacrifice them to God. But I destroyed the rest." Saul is chastised by God through the prophet. And Saul rebukes, but I did obey the Lord. I did everything he says. I went on the mission that the Lord assigned me, and I completely destroyed the Amalekites, and I brought back just Agag, their king, because I wanted to make a mockery of him. And after Samuel again calls him out on this move, he tells him that obedience is worth so much more than sacrifice to God. And that the foolishness and evil is not tolerated by God. And Saul repents and he says, "Well, I was afraid of the people, so I gave in to them. Forgive me." Remember we talked about Aaron just a couple of weeks ago with the golden calf? When Moses comes down and he goes, "How could you do this?" "Oh, the people were too much, and so I just threw it in the fire, and that's what came out." We always have a line, don't we? We always have a lie. We always have a reason why we did what we did. He says, "Forgive me," but you can see now with the different things that Saul has done by his actions that his heart, he's not sorry. He's just sorry he got caught. And there is a big difference between the two. And he says, it's at this day that the Lord has removed you from the throne. And as he's leaving, Saul is crying out, and he grabs the hem of Samuel's robe, and it tears. And Samuel says, "This is a sign. The kingdom will be torn from you." So Saul's heart has changed. He does not plead for his sin, but more the reputation, his appearance. He's always trying to save face with the guys. And Samuel had King Agag brought before him in front of Saul. And if you read the scriptures, it's a lot more than what the movie depicts. But as Agag is brought before him, he's still mocking the Israelites, and he thinks, now that the prophet came, I'm free and clear. And he's already plotting how he's going to get his revenge. And it's actually Samuel then who kills him, since Saul didn't. And Samuel goes off, and Saul never sees him again. Samuel dies. But Samuel continues to mourn for Saul. He continues to grieve. And so did the Lord. The Lord grieved that he had made Saul king over Israel. Then the Lord says to Samuel, he says, "Quit mourning after Saul, because I am sending you to the house of Jesse of Bethlehem, because I have chosen one of his sons